Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, whatever time it is you undertake the viewing of this show. I am Larry Fields, joined by Dr. Charles Alexander and the Mike Jones. Welcome to the Level Set. We're going to delve into a study issue today that was unearthed in one of, I won't even call it one of his deep dives, but in just his regular academic rigors by Dr. Charles Alexander. He has presented the letter from Robert E. Lee to Andrew Hunter. And the issue that's raised by Robert E. Lee is the employing of Negro troops in 1865. Bear with us as we read this letter. It is a read of some length, but it's necessary in order for us to engage in the dialogue that we plan on entertaining today. So I will start here. Robert E. Lee starts the letter. Dear Sir, I have received your letter of the 7th instance, and without confining myself to the order of your interrogatories, will endeavor to answer them by a statement of my views on the subject. I shall be most happy if I can contribute to the solution of a question in which I feel an interest commensurate with my desire for the welfare and happiness of our people. Considering the relation of master and slave, controlled by humane laws and influenced by Christianity and an enlightened public sentiment, as the best that can exist between the white and black races while intermingled as at present in this country, I would deprecate any sudden disturbance of that relation unless it be necessary to avert a greater calamity to both. I should therefore prefer to rely upon our white population to preserve the ratio between our forces and those of the enemy, which experience has shown to be safe. But in view of the preparations of our enemies, it is our duty to provide for continued war and not for a battle or a campaign. And I fear that we cannot accomplish this without overtaxing the capacity of our white population. Should the war continue under the existing circumstances, the enemy may, in course of time, penetrate our country and get access to a large part of our Negro population. It is his avowed policy to convert the able bodied men among them into soldiers and to emancipate all. The success of the federal arms in the South was followed by a proclamation of President Lincoln for 280,000 men, the effect of which will be to stimulate the northern states to procure as substitutes for their own people Negroes thus brought within their reach. Many have already been obtained in Virginia, and should the fortune of war expose more of her territory, the enemy would gain a large accession to his strength. His progress will thus add to his numbers and at the same time destroy slavery in a manner most pernicious to the welfare of our people. Their Negroes will be used to hold them in subjugation, leaving the remaining force of the enemy free to extend his conquest. Whatever may be the effect of our employing Negro troops, it cannot be mischievous, as this, if it end in subverting slavery, it will be accomplished by ourselves, and we can devise the means of alleviating the evil consequences to both races. I think, therefore, we must decide whether slavery shall be extinguished by our enemies and the slaves be used against us, or use them ourselves at the risk of the effects which must be produced upon our social institutions. My opinion is that we should employ them without delay. I believe that with proper regulations, they can be made efficient soldiers. They possess the physical qualifications in an eminent degree. Long habits of obedience and subordination, coupled with the moral influence which in our country the white man possesses over the black, furnish an excellent foundation for that discipline which is the best guarantee of military efficiency. Our chief aim should be to secure their fidelity. There have been formidable armies composed of men having no interest in the cause for which they fought beyond their pay or the hope of plunder. But it is certain that the surest foundation upon which the fidelity of an army can rest, especially in a service which imposes peculiar hardship and privations, is the personal entry of the soldier and the issue of the contest. Such an interest we can give our Negroes by giving immediate freedom to all who enlist, and freedom at the end of the war to the families of those who discharge their duties faithfully, whether they survive or not, parenthetically, together with the privilege of residing at the South. To this might be added a bounty for faithful service. We should not expect slaves to fight for prospective freedom when they can secure it at once by going to the enemy, in whose service they will incur no greater risk than in ours. The reason that induced me to recommend the employment of Negro troops at all render the effect of the measures I have suggested upon slavery immaterial. And in my opinion, the best means of securing the efficiency and fidelity of the auxiliary force would be to accompany the measure with a well-digested plan of gradual and general emancipation, as that will be the result of the continuance of the war and will certainly occur if the enemy succeed. It seems to me most advisable to adopt it at once and thereby obtain all the benefits that will accrue, that is, to our cause. The employment of the Negro troops under regulations similar in principle to those above indicated would, in my opinion, greatly increase our military strength and enable us to relieve our white population to some extent. I think we could dispense with the reserve forces except in cases of necessity. It would disappoint the hopes which our enemies base upon our exhaustion, deprive them in a great measure of the aid they now derive from black troops, and thus throw the burden of the war upon their own people. In addition to the great political advantages that would result to our cause from the adoption of a system of emancipation, it would exercise a salutary influence upon our whole Negro population by rendering more secure the fidelity of those who become soldiers and diminishing the inducements to the rest to abscond. I can only say in conclusion that whatever measures are to be adopted should be adopted at once. Every day's delay increases the difficulty. Much time will be required to organize and discipline the men, and action may be deferred until it is too late. Very respectfully, your obedient servant, R.E. Lee, General. Gentlemen, you can have at that letter. It's so much embedded there that's current and present. I will allow you all to start where you start. Mike Jones, I see you shaking your head. And I feel that I feel those sentiments constantly, particularly after I grapple with an analysis that you have laid on the table in a manner that I haven't seen before. So we're gonna go directly to you.
I when Charles sent that out, and I read it yesterday because I was not familiar with it. I thought it was a profound. It's as profound as anything I've ever read about race in America, about us in America from a white perspective that dealt with managing our subordination as he thinks out what the next iteration of that subordination needs to look like, because the current iteration is not sustainable. Because that's literally what he's talking about. We've lost, and to me, now Lee was an enslaver of the worst order. So this high-minded Christian, the myth of Lee, Robert E. Lee, and the reality of Robert E. Lee for us is totally two different things. The myth of him for white folks, and that's all part of the lost cause scenario. But what I was struck with was the clarity of his thinking, and really I envied him, and made me feel bad about us. That the ability to be that duplicitous and insightful at the same time. Okay, to say I'm prepared to switch this out for that because I can still be who I am for that, even though superficially it looks the same. And for me, uh, what he did was literally outline the next 100 years of American history for us. Okay, if you the longer you think about what he wrote, that's fundamentally what I experienced. It uh, keeps me in America. We're Groundhog Day. We keep dealing with the superficial circumstance, the obvious part of it, and never really analyze the underlying uh, principles behind what's going on, and we keep being trapped in a new trick because we're not fundamentally looking at. So what he basically said was, you can emancipate black slaves, and it really will not matter to our control and superior position. You just have to get used to the different social order. And I think it, I think I think it resonates uh, with what we've been seeing for the last 100 years.
I agree with everything you just stated, and I'm going to go directly to Dr. Alexander. But see, what happens is you think that the system is not working when it fails you, but the system is acting just as and producing the outcome that the system wants to produce. And we've had too many leaders that think that the system, is creating the harm to our folks on accident. Dr. Alexander, your opinion.
I mean, we're vulnerable to our leaders. That our vulnerability to our leaders is kind of collectively our fault. But um, I one of the things I think is a remarkable letter too, and I have the ability to be able to read these things contextually and not get swept up in not be overwhelmed by by the content or the sentiment, right? And so it's kind of similar to when you read the Dred Scott case, and it's, black folks have no rights that the white man is bound to, or the Negro has no rights that the white man is bound to respect. Well, that was the case, right? And so people are like, how could they say such a thing? We were not citizens. And per his statement in that piece, we were never meant to be citizens, so we couldn't file suit in court against anybody else, blah, 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 blah. But we look at all those things from this position, from whatever our relative position is now. So it's hard for us to manage, what we're hearing or reading sometimes because, we interpret it from this point of relative freedom. So, but what I think is important about the whole thing is that, yesterday was the 160th anniversary or commemoration of that letter. That letter went out January 11th, 1865. And so when he's having this conversation, the war was literally over. So they had just gotten their tails kicked in Nashville, and Sherman was running roughshod through Georgia. And so the Confederacy was literally on its last leg at that moment, and the the tricky part of it, and I think the part where they still could have gotten some momentum, is that for all intents and purposes, the Union hadn't freed anybody. And in fact, on August 30th of 1861, when General Fremont, who Lincoln had placed in control of the Western Front, and that being, primarily that Western Front being housed in St. Louis in the state of Missouri, Fremont emancipated. He ordered martial law in the state of Missouri and issued an emancipation order that Lincoln immediately, and this emancipation order preceded Lincoln's emancipation, and Lincoln ordered him to rescind that order because he didn't want to upset the border states for fear that they may align with the South. And so then we fast forward to 62. That's when 1862. That's when Lincoln and Congress finally, say that it's okay to enlist Black men in the army. And so by the time Lee is writing this, he's 3 years behind in terms of the enlistment piece. But the slavery piece is still an issue because, in fact, the Union hadn't freed anybody. And even with the enlisted men, at its height, I think it's 280,000. And so if the South had pivoted at that point, they still had 3.8 million Black folks, behind literally enemy lines. That flips the whole script. And so we don't, again, many of us are overwhelmed by the content. So we won't even just on our free will go back and explore these types of things and see how those dynamics exist and process it and understand what it means. Now, my last piece on this is that simultaneously, that same day, 4 years ago, Lincoln rescinded or forced Fremont to retract that Emancipation Proclamation in the state of Missouri. But on January 11th, 1865, the state of Missouri emancipated enslaved Africans. So on the same day he wrote that Lee wrote that response, we were emancipated in the state of Missouri, which predates the 13th Amendment, predates Juneteenth, all of these other things that we celebrate in terms of our emancipation, because slavery is a states' rights issue, is false for us. We should be turning our people toward January 11th. When I say our, I mean people in Missouri, toward January 11th, 1865. It predates all of these other things that we're toiling with, and it just further confuses our relative march towards freedom. And it's not just us, it's all kind of people. So like even when we get to Juneteenth, you take like Delaware, they hadn't emancipated slavery by Juneteenth. And so there were still people enslaved. The Creek and Choctaw Nations didn't emancipate people in what is now Oklahoma until 1866. And so this thought and notion that we wasn't free until everybody was free is patently false. If that point in time is relative to Juneteenth. And so to the degree that Juneteenth date don't matter nationally, beyond the fact that this white man just said it did, folks in St. Louis and folks over the state of Missouri should be celebrating January 11th, 1865. And for me, that's that's really kind of that's the part that's really kind of striking for me in the letter, is that he's calling for something that he's clearly 3 years behind on. They're getting their tails kicked, yet it still could have been a strategic and probably a successful mark, because 3.8 million Black folks were still in the South.
Now, Charles, I just want to add a little hook on what you just said. The other thing that struck me in the letter is the difference in the thinking of a soldier versus a politician. And I'm going back to you mentioning Fremont in Missouri in 1861. For them, emancipation was a function of weakening the enemy and winning a war. It didn't have literally anything to do with the morality of the issue. Is
no social dictates or anything.
Right. And it wasn't concerned with any social thing. Lee, at that point, is thinking the same way that Freeman did. And you mentioned Sherman, who's really set fire to the South, and the 40 mules and an acre is Sherman. It was never Lincoln. It was never. That's what Sherman did, and he did it before the Civil War was over. And he did it as a way of weakening and dismantling the enemy's infrastructure. So,
Field Order 15.
Right. And so it's understanding how to think when you won in a fight and when you got power, and how to use your power to your advantage in the struggle. And you don't worry about how it negatively impacts your adversary. Matter of fact, the whole point of you being there is to negatively impact your adversary. And we had this in our quote pre-production meeting that I said, and you ain't gonna learn as long as we spend the time we spend in Sunday school. We ain't preparing none of our folks to be generals fighting the battle.
No, we're not. In fact, what we're preparing our folks to do is to maintain the status quo. And the more apt you are to do that, the higher marks you'll receive. We've been joined by Attorney Gerald T. Christmas this morning. Glad to see you, Dr. Christmas. Um, as you know, we are talking about the letter that Dr. Alexander sent us all regarding Robert E. Lee speaking in terms of inculcating Black soldiers into into his army's cause. What are the thoughts that bubble up to the top when you think of this letter?
When I think about it, I just think about, just as Mike was saying, that nobody was looking at the morality of any of this. It was just about how can we win and what do we need to do to win, and the sacrifice that would need to be made in order to win. And that's just how I look at that. They're not thinking about what is the concern for us at any given time throughout any of this process. Neither one of them. All they're thinking about is how I can win and what I can use to win and get to that goal.
We find ourselves at a point in history, present day history, where we have more Black leadership nationally than we've ever had. As we look at this letter and we look at similar sentiments, do we have the folks we need to forward our cause? And
No.
what is our cause?
I think
our cause should be. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
And Gerald, you can answer it, but I think that is our existential question. What is it that we trying to get done? And I don't think we've ever resolved that.
I agree. That's what I was just getting ready to say. I think that's what we're trying to figure out, but that's the conversation we've never had. What are we trying to get? Because our focus is always on what we're trying to do to be more American, to be more white, to move this move this country forward. Like we've had several conversations about why should we care if America falls? But we are as much invested into this right now as the white citizens are in America. We have not had a real conversation about what is in our best interest and what do we want and what do we want to do. We don't see ourselves past being here in this country, past being American. We don't see our worldwide importance or what our duty is at all.
Well, I don't necessarily agree that we haven't had the conversation. We've had the conversation 100 million times. The issue is,
I guess, I mean, this is what I mean, Dr. Alexander, too, about it. We haven't had it lately. I feel like we've had previous conversations and we have talked about these issues, but lately, as it is affecting us right here and now, with the collective education that we have and resources, we haven't had that conversation.
well, again, I think the conversation occurs. I believe our issue kind of stems from, the major issue I think that we have is that this 400 some odd year process has taught us to seek leadership in a single individual, and that individual being some charismatic teacher, who comes looking like one of these people, again, from some of our previous conversations, this biblical Messiah type of person. And
that's what I was going to ask you. Do you think we're always looking for somebody from a religious standpoint?
And it was not necessarily a religious standpoint, but from a religious framework, if that makes sense. So not that person has to emerge from that, but I think that framework shapes the way that we think of leadership. Like we're literally waiting for this guy to get, so if we're in St. Louis, we waiting for this woman, washing clothes on the banks of the Mississippi with this little baby and she find this baby floating down the river. And so that's what we waiting on. And then out of that, he go and blah, blah. And so we have to create the leadership. We are our leadership. But because of that framework, we get stuck and things are stagnant because it causes us to have this external locus of control. Whatever is happening to us in mass, so many of us think, we think it from that religious framework. Strategy, by definition, is an internal piece. So in order for you to work out, problem solving is internal. It's not external, and so if we're not internally focused and we're not looking at who we are relative to this thing, and we've given, we've kind of literally given up our day-to-day, many of us, not all of us, but many of us are giving up our day-to-day to this future and beyond because we know who sits on the throne. That's not sustainable for nationhood. Now, the other part of that is we are here, and we've been here since 1619, and so and we've been having this conversation, and and we do have people, and we talked about this last week. We do have people that left. We have people who stay here, who live off the grid. We got a lot of people doing a lot of different things, but in mass, we have people who are trying to, go along to kind of get along. But that too is a function of this place. I think we underestimate, and then I mentioned this, I think last week or the week before, I think we underestimate this thing we live in. United States government overturns countries' governments. You don't think it can destroy the Black community? There's 40 million of them that don't really own jack. And we don't have the means to protect ourselves. We are here because they don't really want to deal with the blowback from the United Nations if they literally tried to exterminate us. That's it, and that is all. we don't have the wherewithal to sustain an all-out assault on this thing. It would look much like Gaza. Now, many of us don't want to deal with that because then we get into that moral space. White folks would never do that. Are you crazy? You don't think they would do that? They're doing it now. You know, and so this is the piece that we're in. And so we cried genocide in 51, right? And even since then, we've had the United Nations pass edicts or whatever, saying that we're entitled to that the African American community is entitled reparations because of the wrongs done to us. United States ain't listening to that. This is a rough place to be. I think we have to.
No, are they listening or are we pushing it? We still going back and forth on the reparations issue right now, even with local cities trying to intervene on reparations. We just got a report here in St. Louis.
But it's winning at the local level, and I think another part of the issue is our because that's a good point, Gerald. But I think the other part of the issue is, again, we're not good stewards of historical information, and we ain't good stewards of today. And so again, you read Stokely Carmichael, you read Malcolm, and even reading Dr. King, you're talking about economic power and political power. Those things are local. They start locally. They got to be local. And if we're not doing that, then it's almost for naught. And so
I understand the local drive.
We have. I mean, I was doing some work with the Chicago torture justice system here, and so that came as a result of this gentleman, John Burge. He was a Vietnam vet, came here, joined the police force, and started torturing people from 1972 to 1991. So he was torturing confessions. Part of that settlement was, free health care and education and some other things for all of this, for the survivors of John Burge and all of their descendants. That is considered a reparations package. Evanston, Illinois has passed a reparations package for people to get into home ownership. They're negotiating a reparation package and have already done some reparations work at the state level in California, and also at the local level. And again, even here in Illinois, in the time that I've been here, there've been these 2 or 3 reparations discussions at the state level. So these things are going on in COBRA. That is the organization that fights these battles. And they go back and forth to the United Nations, and they go to all of these national conferences. These things are occurring all the time. Part of our other problem is that we are dependent upon the corporate media to tell us that we fight. That ain't gonna happen. They want you to believe just what we believe, that we're not doing nothing. And so these fights are occurring with relative success, depending on where they are. We kind of have to do the work and understand what it is that we're looking at. But at the end of the day, for all intents and people, we're still second-class citizens in this thing that wreaks havoc globally. And so if it can do what it does to other nations, certainly it can do that to 46 million Black folks.
So,
without a doubt, I agree with the organizing at the local level. When we talk about reparations across the board, though, I just think that the funding of it and what needs to happen needs to come from a federal level, because a lot of times these cities and states just don't have the money.
I mean, but it's going to grow. It's got to grow to a federal level. And then the issue isn't the allocation. The issue is will. They send Israel $3.6 billion every year. So this isn't a funding issue. And so the feds could do this. We saw what the feds did randomly with money during COVID. So
During COVID, exactly.
right. So we know that. So this is an issue of will, and this is what goes back to that letter: is that it ain't really about our well-being. It's about what is, what works for, the haves.
I was thinking about an example like we had here in St. Louis. I think the city right now is making $500 payments to individuals. And I just thought that money like that could be used better in developing the infrastructure and looking at other necessary needs in North St. Louis.
Gerald and Charles, literally, Gerald, to your last point, I think for me, we misunderstand what I think reparations should be about. I think there is a case for reparations based on a legal principle. You cannot profit from ill-gotten gains, and a thief cannot pass on better title than he has. Am I right, counselors?
You are correct, sir.
You're absolutely correct.
So the wealth that the enslaved Africans and their descendants created was stolen from them, and they represent ill-gotten gains as far as I'm concerned. And I think you can legally argue that. You ain't gonna win with these white courts, but I think that but there is an argument. And then secondly, since they are ill-gotten gains, the inheritors of that wealth don't have title to it either, because the thief cannot pass on good title. Okay, so to me, that's how you should be framing the argument. Secondly, though, I have a second issue with it, and it's with us. I don't, at that level, I'm going to say I'm Sicilian. You can't put a number on what you did to us, okay? That you can't pay, you'll never be able to pay for that. And I'm with Michael Corleone. Somebody got to pay for Santino. Okay, so that ought to be where we stand. So our notion of reparations should be the dismantling of this system that creates these economic imbalances that we were the foundation of and the biggest victim of, and have a reordered society that's not based on the maximizing of private capitalism. So sending black folks a check would be like sending suckers poor folks lottery who win the lottery. 3 years later, they ain't gonna have no money because the system at the end that made them poor is still the same system. So they'll give you the money and they'll have it all back in a generation. So I think we ought to think about it different.
And whether or not they have it all back, yeah. So for us here, the situation rests with the nature of the system itself, right?
Right.
So there's huge wealth disparity that is so first of all, people who do this, they already know how to do the calculation. So just like they know, if this, even if we do like pay equity and all that kind of stuff, it takes 200 years for us to catch up. Right. So they know how to get a number that, in theory, does this, that, or the other to get us to equity that wouldn't take the 200 years. They know how to do that. And they got the ability to do it. They just ain't gonna do it. But to Mike's central point, even with the wealth disparity that exists, resource distribution looks the same for Black folks as it does for white folks. It's just that we got less wealth overall. So all of the wealth in the Black community is concentrated in the top 20%, just like it is for the white community. So if we got it and they made all of this equal, it would look the same for the least of these. The people at the top would it'd be more black folks looking like Elon Musk and them other cats, them other billionaires. There certainly would be more of them. But so like even now, like there are like 11, 12, something like somewhere 10 to 15 black billionaires. They collectively have about $33 billion, somewhere between 30 and $40 billion. They make up about a 16th or a 20th of what Elon Musk has by himself. So that number would certainly increase, but the wealth disparity would still exist in the same way that it's stratified now, because the system itself is flawed. So that doesn't benefit the masses. But that is a part of the problem. I mean, so that's a part of our challenge is the political structure, and then the other part of it is the economic structure, and you got to have that latter really in order to do the former, and so without the economic base, you can't have the education and you can't have the funding. If you don't have the education and the funding, you're not going to be, first of all, there's huge correlation between education and income and political activity otherwise. And so with folks on the lower end of those things, education and finances, voting and just political agendas aren't the most important thing in a given day. Eating is the most important thing in a given day. And so this is the tricky nature of this piece. We have to do a better job of kind of parsing this thing out. Even here, we have conversation. We don't live, ain't none of us living like the typical Black person. We all live well beyond the median and average income of Black household. And so we have to look at it. We definitely have to take into consideration what our day is like versus what the typical Black person's day is, and how they allocate their resources and what they deem to be an imminent threat versus what we deem to be an imminent threat. Because that too, that's the function of this system. It separates, because that's what it's supposed to do.
I think though, Charles.
Let me go back. Let me go back. I want to go back to the letter, and I think it is pertinent. I think it's germane to the conversation that's going on now, and germane to the a conversation that we had in the green room where we were speaking about the influence of professional athletes and forcing gambling down the throats of individuals and a false hope, in my opinion. So I want to go back to the letter specifically where Lee states, my opinion is that we should employ them without delay. I believe that with proper regulations, they can be made efficient soldiers. They possess the physical qualifications in an eminent degree. Long habits of obedience and subordination coupled with the moral influence, which in our country the white man possesses over the Black, furnish an excellent foundation for that discipline, which is the best guarantee of military efficiency. Our chief aim should be to secure their fidelity. Now, as we look around today, is this framework still in play?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yes, you reward. I mean, we see that. I mean, it's very, very easy to see it when you look at, and this too is where we struggle. So when you look at Black folks ascending in the Republican Party, you see that. But for whatever reason, we don't look at it the same way when we're looking at the Democratic Party. So that dude back to him again, that dude in St. Louis, Hakeem Jeffries, all of these folks, Kamala takes all these folks who take all that money from from the Israeli pack, that's these people. All these folks that you see all the time, they are bought and sold. Anybody you see anybody that's a standard on mainstream media is safe. Otherwise, you wouldn't see them. We gotta overthink that. And so
you're in Chicago. You're in Chicago. Let me just say Craig Hodges.
Craig Hodges, right? And so, and then even with Craig Hodges, the same thing with Mahmoud Raouf, that even when those guys got back into working in the league, it was secret. Like, what none of those teams saying that they were paying those guys to work out their players because they had been banned or they've been ostracized because they are taking their public stances for us. And then they get back into those spaces and they start to generate some income and da-da-da-da-da. And it was kind of, don't say that. Don't say that Craig Hodges is getting paid by the Lakers. Don't say that. And so, and I'm not saying that Craig Hodges sold out. I'm saying that they then take somebody else who is safe. Like, why are we listening to why does everything that Charles Barkley touched turn to gold? Because he's safe. I mean, and we got to look at it that way, but we don't. We be happy because really many of us just want, and it's the same thing in the political space as it is in entertainment otherwise. We just want to be recognized. We don't necessarily want good representation. We want to be recognized that, oh, that's a part of, that's a part of the internalization of racism.
Yeah. Larry, to your point, I would say our fundamental, not just this one, but a fundamental issue we have is we have not spent any time really thinking about the impact of oppression on the people, sustained oppression on the people for 400 years. And you just don't walk away from that. The reason, and I would give us two examples in Asia versus the continent of Africa. And the reason that the Chinese and the Vietnamese can assert their national interests in spite of America or anybody else, and China has once again become the global behemoth that it historically has always been. It's because they liberated themselves. Okay, Mao Zedong led a revolt that lasted 30 years. He created a couple generations, from his perspective, freedom fighters. Now, white folks in America don't call them that, but that's what they were. The Vietnamese started their struggle against the Japanese. When they defeated the Japanese, they then defeated the French, who were trying to come back, and then they kicked the Americans' ass. So they own Vietnam. It's their country. So when you're dealing with them, you're dealing with what they took back. We go to Africa, and I'll always think that the reason the United States policy shifted on South Africa and they got rid of the white apartheid regime and freed Nelson Mandela is because the generation behind Mandela was on the verge of armed struggle and getting ready to engage in their physical liberation. And they've seen what has happened when people free themselves. They no longer have control of them. That's literally the point of Lee's. That's the point Lee makes in the letter. If we
Please
do this,
amplify that. Please amplify that, Mike.
okay, it's when I'll give you a simple way to understand it. Is somebody takes your lunch money every day because you're afraid to fight. And then one day he quits taking your lunch money. He'll never take it again. I guarantee you one thing: you'll be scared of him the rest of your life. But the day you said, "I'm not giving up the lunch money," and you can whoop my ass, but I'm not giving up the lunch money. All you're gonna get from me every day is a fight till you get too tired to fight. Because I'll fight every day till you quit messing with me. You know what? Your position on him, what about so-and-so? Fuck him now. Because you liberated yourself. That's the difference. And we got into nonviolent resistance out of necessity, as Charles has said. We just don't have the numbers. There ain't no other way we could have done it. Okay, can do it. But I think it's important for us, and that's where the whole Palestinian thing comes into effect. But it's I'm old enough to know where most black folks stood on the Vietnam War, but there was always part of the black establishment say, well, you can't do that because it'll mess up what we're doing here. But we need to align ourselves with freedom struggles of all oppressed people who are fundamentally people of color. They ain't all people of color, but they most people of color. And if that puts you adverse to the United States government, so what? So what would it mean if 50 black congressmen, because we got 50 of them now, didn't support the United States policy in Gaza? They in a position to be disruptive as hell at Congress. As a matter of fact, you couldn't pass it. You might pass it, but you pass it over our objection. You got a couple of black senators who would be willing to filibuster.
But those
Right?
Negroes not scared of the United States government. They're scared of the Israeli pact.
But I'm saying is that's cause you ain't been willing to get your ass kicked about your lunch money. That's the point I'm making. I'm not
they
going.
like the lunch money is my point.
They'd rather be fat and happy.
They'd rather have the lunch money. Yeah,
But
they're not.
our
But they're not
problem
fat.
is
But
we
they're not
keep,
fat and happy. But
They
they're
are
not fat and happy.
They are
but
not.
we keep wherever they're
They still
from.
scared. They still
Wherever
fat and
those
scared.
people are from, those people keep voting those people in.
Right.
And so
And that's
that
the point that I was getting ready to
that
make,
part is
Dr.
our
Alexander.
responsibility.
You know, the masses that are putting these people in office, they are acting the way that these people want them to act. With Wesley Bell in the congressional race here in the 1st Congressional District, it was the Negroes in St. Louis County that put him in office. He didn't win the city. He didn't win the Negroes in the city. He won the Negroes in the county. The
By
upper
an
echelon Negroes.
overwhelming percentage.
That was the upper echelon Negroes, the Negroes who thought they had arrived, the
And they will
educated
act the
ones,
same.
the ones that were supposed to be having our consciousness in their mindset, you know, who have resources, who have education. They are the ones that put him in office.
And so back to my previous conversation or comments, if all of this were to change and we were to have economic parity, it would look the exact same because they would be beholden to the same system that they're beholden to now, which is what informs their political choices.
And that's
yeah,
why we have to get to the conscience of our people. When we talked about before, when we talked about the Nguzu Saba and the principles of Kwanzaa and how they need to be practiced on a year-round basis consistently all the time, we're not in the conscience of those people who have resources in our community because they are more
correct.
concerned about what the white people are thinking and how they can continue living the lifestyle that they're living. And even if we are living that lifestyle, like you said, we individually may be living a certain lifestyle that, you know, other people in our community are not living. We're not far from it though. And when I say that, what I mean is that we still have relatives, or I still have relatives I know living in that condition.
Correct.
And I'm not that far attached from them. Not at all. You understand? I still am dealing with them on a regular basis. I know what those situations are. I'm not, you know, so far gone that I don't understand what is actually going on in the Black community and with Black people that are suffering through poverty and miseducation and undereducation.
This
But
It's,
respectability politics has been killing us for a long time.
yeah,
it's
Now,
a thing. It is a thing. And, you know, and we have to face it. But again, I think like we have to look at all of these things, you know, we got to look at the thing, we got to look at them now, and we got to look at them before, and we got to kind of be able to trace the trajectory of all of these things as they appear because they've always existed. And so,
Charles,
go ahead.
yeah, to that point, they've always existed. I agree with you. There's just different iterations over time. What it looks like in 1865 ain't what it looked like in 1965, not what it looks like today. What I what I think for me is at the crux of the problem about developing the consciousness that Gerald was talking about is asking the basic question: who am I and why am I? And it would seem to me, if you answer that question as I'm an American, we're Americans, and we deserve to be treated like Americans, which most Americans ain't treated very well, but that's just the point philosophically. You now have bought into a system that fundamentally diminishes you as one of its foundational principles. So there's literally no way for you to overcome that. As Du Bois said, a system that was not designed for you cannot fail you. So our exclusion, our deprivation at whatever level you want to deal with it at is not a bug. It's a feature of the system. It's the way this system works. So the real question is, if you're not an American or you choose not to define yourself as that, then who are you? The closest thing that I can come up with that's connected to any reality is I'm a descendant of the African diaspora in North America. And then you start to look at the world from that perspective, because we live in Einstein's universe, and Einstein's universe is relative. So what it looks like is always a function of where you sit. So as a member of the African diaspora in North America, I got a whole different worldview and context on America than I'd have if I consider myself an American. So at some point, and I just have not figured out how to write this, but I think I said a couple of weeks ago. I got the title for it. I just don't know what to do with it. We have to accept that we are a stranger in a strange land, and that's all we will ever be here.
Correct.
Now, if we got a destiny, that's our destiny. Okay.
Well, I mean, you all don't, well, see, Mike, the further you get away from Sunday school, the closer you get to Sunday school, because you just described a peculiar people to me. Uh, and that's what it has. But I want to go back to a statement that you made about taking your liberation and with respect to South Africa and how when South Africa saw that occurring, they made the switch. Well, if we go back to St. Louis to Moses Dixon, man that had that trained the Knights of Liberty, that started the Knights of Liberty, that had trained over 42,000 soldiers across the South. I think they were in every state except Texas and Mississippi. Those guys, we were on the verge back in 1850 of doing exactly that. So, I mean, so this consciousness
We
connection
were on the verge of what?
well, we were on the verge of employing techniques that we thought would have accomplished an emancipation of ourselves. Many of those same soldiers were rolled directly into the Union Army, as well as Moses
Correct.
himself.
Correct.
They were all, merged there. So, my point is this disconnection with our history is killing us as well.
And I agree. But like even with that, I mean, I believe we struggle. We struggle with dynamism, and being able to go from the micro to the macro and vice versa. That at best was going to be a good story for us to leverage, upon which we could leverage agency.
And that's
At
important
best.
too. That's important too.
And so, I study Moses Dixon and all that. I've been over to Father Dixon's, cemetery. I see, see the obelisk and all of that kind of stuff. And at best, that's where that gets, because that's the problem now, is because in order, like, if that's going to be our thing, and that's the trouble. So the tricky thing for us, even when we start to look to these international examples, the Vietnamese were ultimately at home. It could work.
Right.
We're not at home. We are outgunned and outmanned, and Moses Dixon was going to be outgunned and outmanned, and that's how that was going to end. But it's the fight that we have to be talking about. It's the fight.
And we stated on this show all the time: oppressed people win
when they resist.
And that's what we got to look at. It's the ongoing resistance, and it's a hard life, and so so some of us will just, I'm just gonna take care of me and mine, and then some of us are really, really beat down by this thing, right?
And we need to add, because I don't think a lot of people understand the connection of Moses Dixon to St. Louis. This was done right here in St. Louis. His organizing, and so we need to really be consciousness of.
I have receipts from most Dixon's from his store. He sold Masonic paraphernalia, and I have receipts from purchases that my great grandfather made from most Dixon. And yeah, he's a thing. Awesome. And awesome. But so it's like, but that's why we got to look at all of it and try to understand, how we got here, but we say things. We say things, and again, we don't deal with the implication. You want to keep something secret from Black folks, put it in the book, and then we'll say, the lion always lose until he writes his own story. There's millions, trillions. There's all kind of Black authors that Black folks don't even know nothing about. It ain't that Black folks ain't writing. It ain't that Black folks aren't addressing these issues. It's that white folks don't recognize that who's Black folks, so we don't either. Facts. And so if we would just take the initiative and be like, so let's go back real quick. So we're not having these conversations. We are having these conversations. I would probably argue, let's say, like, the Black Studies movement hasn't really ended. It's looking different. What does it look like now? We're about to fight this anti-DEI fight on college campuses, right? That the fact that we were having Black Studies, perpetually, or at least continually, let me say, that we were having continual growth in Black Studies since the formal Black Studies piece started, was an indication that we were still fighting that fight. Now that fight's about to heat up. Why? Because Trump's here. Right? Now, the problem is it was already hot because it's really a state issue. And so, again, while St. Louis, Negroes in St. Louis is pointing fingers at DeSantis, Missouri is one of the worst book banning states in the country, probably worse than Florida. And so this stuff is happening all the time. And so for us, if it's not in the mass media, the corporate mass media, we don't know these things are happening. And so we have Black folks writing. We have Black folks who are columnists. We have Black folks who are, novelists. We have Black folks who write fiction and nonfiction and all this kind of, who are capturing the essence of who we are and putting it out there. If we're not purchasing and supporting our Black artists, shame on us. And so we can't be dependent on white folks to put us on. And that is a part of this thing that we have internalized. That is a function of our lot in life. And that's a part of what we also have to fight. That is that Kuji Shagalia. That is that self-determination.
Charles, to that point and the point that Larry raised, I, for a long time, at least the last 10 years, fundamentally, there is a Black canon of intellectual work in art, politics, history, that you could literally educate Black children about the whole world, the history of the world, and they would be as skilled and as literate as anybody on the planet and never have read any Europeans. Okay? That's how much exists from our perspective. I think, though, that we don't wrestle with the problem is that what locks us up is the thing that keeps working class white people locked up. Okay? We get processed the same way they get processed because they're more racist and bigoted, and that's the race wage that Du Bois used to talk about for white folks, but they don't pay no more. Okay, and that's why you have a lot of this existential angst on their part. So I would say we should take something from Lee's letter, because the thing that really struck me about his thinking in the middle of being an avowed white supremacist enslaver, he was willing to radically rechange how he was willing to go be organized and work in order to maintain his position. That For him, it was about maintaining the position, not specifically how it looked. And you got these ordinary racist white folks that make up MAGA and stuff like that, and they caught up in, well, I don't want them to. Matter of fact, you don't have to worry about me. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion the worst damn thing ever happened to us. Okay, the more shit we do with white folks, the more messed up we get. Okay, so the last thing you should ever want for your children is to be included in diversity. Okay, I think I told you guys about a month or so ago. I think I'm okay because I was raised in a black community. I was inoculated by the time I went into the world. I was a punk by the time I got to be grown, 18, 20 years old, going to college. And I had the advantage of the Black Power movement in the 60s. So all of that made me a different person. And to your point, Charles, you said the Black Studies program. If you were a black college student in the 60s, you were not trying to integrate white campuses or be included in white activity. You wanted to carve out black spaces inside of this white environment. And they were black spaces, you know, and matter of fact, it wasn't for nobody but us. So you were not trying. Two things people today, and we need to be aware of. I'm going to go say this because I looked up the statistic. 89% of all the black people in America were born after 1965. That's profound. That means they've never lived in Jim Crow America. They never saw the Black Power movement. They never saw the civil rights movement. They don't, you know, Emmett Till and Medgar Evers and Martin Luther King, their assassinations and murder are not part of 87% of our lived experiences if you're black. Most black people today think Martin Luther King was a hero. And because we got a holiday and white folks talk about the dream, Martin Luther King was the most reviled black man in America in 1968 when he was murdered. Okay, white folks thought he was terrible, and if you were young Mike Jones, you thought he was too slow. Okay, that we was moving on to something else. And in America, he was trying to change. We didn't think was worth changing. So literally, he probably on that day in Memphis in April, he's very much alone. Mm-hmm. Another guy that's a hero, and everybody talks about him. You know, he's the greatest and stuff like Muhammad Ali. Greatest heavyweight of all time that we never saw at his peak, because he couldn't fight because of his stance on the war. White folks could not stand, the United States government could not stand Ali. None of these men have been repackaged and homogenized to be part of the myth or fantasy of America.
Mm-hmm. But it's literally like the sanitation that Lee was talking about.
Right, exactly. And so to me, if I were teaching a course, I would make all the black folks, if I was teaching a Black Studies course, I'd make everybody read that letter. And until they could dissect it to understand what he's talking about and why and how you do, till you understand how to think like that, you're always going to be a victim in there because you're up against somebody who's always evolving in terms of how they oppress.
Let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, and I want to hear all three of you all's opinion on this. How many individuals, you talked about maintaining a position, maintaining his position, Mike. how many individuals in our community have that same mindset? And I mean, we'll take Hakeem Jeffries, for example. Okay, I want to maintain my position. And so I'm going to take this PAC money and I'm going to do this and that. So I mean, what position should we be defining?
Well, I'm saying when I say maintain his position, I'm not talking about his rank as a Confederate general. I'm talking about his position as a white supremacist. And
Absolutely.
he said, white supremacy can look like this, but if this goes on and we lose, it'll be gone. So how do we maintain the position of white supremacy? By basically evolving.
But he had
Okay, we ain't
he
changed.
had a group consciousness though.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. He said we need to evolve. And somebody say, well, they changed. No, we just evolved. We ain't changed. We still who we were. We just got a new bag now. Okay.
Gotcha.
And you thinking about it was all about the bag you saw back in the day. No, that's just the way we did it then. This is the way we do it now. But we ain't changed. We just evolved. And it's holding on. It's and literally, I think, Larry, I would tell people, you got to remember that you live in Einstein's universe, not Newton's. I'm doing both of them this service. But Newton's universe is constant. So everything is fixed and stays the same. So any change is total disruption. Okay, it's a disaster. In Einstein's universe is constantly evolving and expanding. So what it was before it ain't gonna be what it is now. But nothing changes in it though. It evolves, it expands, and it's the jazz. Larry, you and I particularly both. You talked about Miles the other week. What makes jazz work is we listen to Louis Armstrong, and Louis Armstrong is foundational to jazz. And then comes Charlie Parker, another foundational figure. Louis Armstrong never played like Charlie Parker. Nobody who heard Charlie Parker wanted to play like Louis Armstrong anymore. The music evolved. It continued to evolve. But everybody who's in it and evolving is always aware of where it comes from. And they build in those foundations to where they take the music next. And to me, if you look at what Lee is saying, is something everybody could use as a strategic reference point.
It's the difference between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset.
Right. He said, and we need to get ahead of this curve because right now we're behind it. And if we stay here, we lose. If we get ahead of it, we can control it and win it. So we ought to be playing ahead of the game as opposed to behind the game. Matter of fact, all the places white folks would let us in now, you shouldn't want to go. It would be. He said, well, you could come in now. That's all right. I don't want to go.
Right. Right. Dr. Christmas. Well, first of all, I'd be remiss if I did not wish you a happy Founders Day, Dr. Christmas.
Thank you.
And the good brothers of Phi Beta Sigma. What are your final thoughts?
I think exactly what we've been saying, and like what Mike just said, those doors that they opening to us, we should refuse to go. And I think when he talks about the fact that since 80, 89, 87% of us now in our population have not experienced the situations that occurred prior to us in the movement, that has made a significant impact on us as a people. My grandmother always said a lump of coal doesn't become a diamond without pressure. And we are under pressure, but we have so many individuals out here in our community now that don't feel that they are under that pressure. You know, we in our group chat, I saw the Instagram of Kamala Harris coming into the funeral for Jimmy Carter and having a look some kind of way at Obama chit-chatting with Trump. And I can understand her having a look, but then she also plays the game too. I think wholeheartedly Obama should have refused to sit next to Trump, and damn sure shouldn't have been sitting there chit-chatting with him after everything that we went through in that process and what we still have to go through. I just thought that sent the wrong message. But of course, he's a safe Negro. You know, we talk about all these people that are on prime time or in these positions, they're in these positions because they're safe Negroes. And ultimately, that is what we have to fight against. We have to look at that letter, as you indicated, drill down on that and focus on those things that we have to focus on as a people. And then we have to set an example and not go into these rooms and not want to be there and not rush to knock down the door every time they open or say you can come in this room. We have to be the ones that say, no, I'm not coming in there. I'm not interested in coming in there. I don't want to come in there, and set this example. You know, just think about, you know, what if Obama had said or refused or made it a story that I'm not going to sit next to Trump. You know, that's part of building the resistance or getting the people ready for what's coming for the inauguration on January the 20th. And we just have to understand how vilified our people were, just like how Mike talked about how vilified Dr. King was at the time that he died. You know, both my parents, my mother and father, would tell me that all the time, how vilified he was, how my great aunts would tell my mother, you need to quit going down there fooling with Dr. King. These white folks ain't gonna never let you in the front of the bus or sit downstairs at the theater. You know, there was a sentiment that was just so against him. And I agree wholeheartedly with the whole idea of these diversity, inclusion, DII programs. You know, we shouldn't have any parts of that. We should not have any parts of that. Even when you talk about the black studies on these campuses, you study black history at home amongst us. You go to college, you learn something else. You learn how to, one, you need to be at an HBCU, and two, how you trying to make that a better institution and how you trying to focus on that and how you need to drive our own institutions instead of being part of a DEI program at a white institution that is not going to do anything to help liberate our people.
Well, I think we probably need to have another conversation on the DEI space because HBCUs can't meet the demand. Where was Bush sitting? I mean, were they? I don't really think nothing of the clip to start with. I mean, because I don't think she's in a position to be looking at Obama for whatever reason. She believes Israel has a right to protect itself. So, that's all looks the same crazy to me. And for all I know, they were sitting 44 and 45. What difference does that make? And so, but to somebody, I guess it makes sense. But back to the letter, fundamentally, I don't necessarily think it's a lot different in terms of putting enslaved Africans, like, so this notion about creating a need, so you put freedom on the table, they'll fight for us, right? Because they're already here, blah, 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 blah. Well, it's the same thing, it's the same trick that they did to poor white folks. Why was poor white folks fighting for the Confederacy? It wasn't nothing in that way of life that did anything but made them poor. But they was white. And so for them, the thing was white. For black folks, it was going to be, we ain't enslaved, because it wasn't going to be no, real great brand of freedom. It was just going to be that they wasn't enslaved. And so that's why it was even on the table. I know that, like, so just like we do the same thing for slightly different reasons. We I think well, I know we're confused about the status of Black folks, just like we're confused about the status of white folks. Again, us on here, we live better than 80 to 90% of white folks. Facts. Most Black folks don't live that way. And so white folks don't have jack doodly squat either. Not the masses. They just have more than us, at those equal levels. And we got to understand that thing at that, at that level, because it impacts the way that too impacts the way that we see the fight. We think that everything is good for all of them, and it is not. And, there's more of them in dire straits than there are Black folks in the United States. Just is. But they are white. And so there are some spaces where they got, where that is enough. And for some of them, that is enough. So for those who live in rural Missouri who don't have medical benefits, it makes sense to them to say, well, I can't afford insulin and I ain't got no teeth, but I ain't gonna take no money from the government. That makes sense for them. I don't know why, but it does. But it's a bunch of them. And so there's probably more of them than there are Black folks in St. Louis and Kansas City combined.
So, I agree totally with what you just said. And that's a reality that I don't think we process enough. The reason I got fixated on Lee's letter that you sent is because I think it's an excellent example of how oppressors really think.
Mm-hmm.
And if you had asked a question, probably of us here and damn near, I'm positive if we just went out on the street and started asking, he said, did Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general who led the Confederate armies, ever advocate for emancipating enslaved Black people? And did he have a rationale for that? Literally, everybody we asked would tell you no if they knew who Robert E. Lee was, based on their superficial understanding of who Lee was. Yet you read what he wrote and you understand that, like, he wanted to keep slavery. That would be his preferred position. But what he was, quote, married to, what he was committed to, was white supremacy. And if he had to change the structural nature of that arrangement with Black folks to maintain the white supremacy, he's more than willing to do that. And I think our strategy problem is we assume we're fighting somebody who's in a fixed position and that he will always be in his position and he will die on this hill.
Mike Jones said they shapeshifters. Mike Jones said they shapeshifters.
Shapeshifters, that's it. Thank you, Larry. I'm done then, because that's the only point I was trying to make.
Well, first of all, like I said, Dr. Alexander, thank you for bringing that letter to the forefront. Mike Jones and Jerry L.T. Christmas, thank you all for your analysis. And once again, to all the brothers of Phi Beta Sigma, happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
And we thank you all for engaging with the level set. We are the level set. Dr. Charles Alexander, D. Mike Jones, Jerry T. Christmas, and Larry Field signing off until next time. And you all have a great week.